Zhao asked Nanquan, "What is the way?" Nanquan said, "Ordinary mind is the way." Zhao asked, "Should I turn myself toward it or not?" Nanquan said, "If you try to turn yourself towards it, you turn away from it." Nanquan said, "The way is not about knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion. Not knowing is blank. If you actually reach the way, you'll find it as vast and boundless as space. How can you talk about this in terms of right and wrong?" With these words, Zhao had a sudden realization. Wumen's verse. Spring comes with its flowers, autumn with the moon, summer with breezes, winter with snow. When useless things don't hang in your mind, that is your best season. It's from the Mumonkan, The Gateless Gate, case 19. I'll add another verse. My ordinary mind, as plain as this cup I hold, what need has perfection of my assent? So obviously ordinary mind is our koan. We are ordinary mind. This is an old koan. Dates from 1,000 years ago. It's been explicated, commented on, understood in different ways. What is this ordinary mind of which we speak? Is it strange, elusive, mysterious? Or is it just this mind with which I sit here, you sit there, full of memory, desire, aspiration, why do we sit? What brings us to sitting? Almost invariably it's, well, I don't want this mind. I don't want this mind in this moment. I don't want this thought. I don't want this feeling. Whether or not we're going to actually label it that specifically. So we can think ordinary mind is this other mind, this somewhere else mind, or this somewhere else me. Or we can take it as ordinary mind, just this, just me as I am, right here, right now. Now, of course, in Zen, we have these broadly two traditions, streams. We have Soto, which emphasizes just sitting. I just sit. One moment of Zazen, one moment of enlightenment. I sit as a Buddha. Or we have Rinzai, that is only two aware that I don't want this mind. I don't want this mind here and now. I want proper, ordinary mind, for which I obviously need to have a truly special experience. I need to achieve Satori. I need to achieve Kensho. I need to make the breakthrough that will break through this veil of illusion into ordinary mind. So by having a truly exceptional experience, I wish to become ordinary. Both ways play with this fundamental desire we have. Soto asks you to just put it aside. Rinzai asks you to engage with it. Knock yourself out with this desire. Batter yourself around the head with it until you collapse. It's this desire, though, which is also our aspiration, our motivation to practice. If we didn't have this desire, we wouldn't be here. We say in Buddhism, and we say in Zen, nothing to do, nowhere to go. We can kind of take this in two different senses. We can either say, right here, right now, I don't feel the need to go anywhere else. There's nothing pulling me off. There's nothing pushing me away or pulling me towards it. This moment is complete. This moment is perfect. This moment is enough. Or I can say, okay, that's fine, but forget it. Actually, what this means is there is nowhere to go. Pick up another famous phrase, wherever you go, you're right here. There is no elsewhere. There is no other mental state, plane of consciousness, way of being, literal place. Oh, if only I were practicing Zen properly in Japan. You know the deal. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing that will simply still this desire for this moment, for this mind to be other. That's a hard thought. Maybe not hard to get your head around, but maybe hard to live with. Either way, the question comes back to, well, clearly, this moment, well, no, not always. I mean, sometimes, sitting, perfection. What more? I mean, really, seriously, what more could any of us possibly want, ever, than to spend our Saturday morning sat on a cushion listening to me talk? What could it get better than that? Or sat outside in the sunshine with one's loved ones, or whatever. But it's not always like that. Sitting's not always like that. Maybe this moment, right here, right now, for you, isn't like that at all. I want that moment, or that moment. Or, if this really is it, then clearly I'm the problem because, frankly, it's not working. In this moment, it's not perfection. In this moment, clearly my mind isn't very ordinary at all. What's going wrong? So we've got these two big ditches on either side of the way, the path, the Tao, which is going nowhere. Either it's kind of my fault and I should be practicing differently, clearly I'm doing it wrong, I should be practicing harder, or maybe there's just something wrong in me. Oh, and there we're right back to Joko Beck's idea, the central stories we tell ourselves, which we keep coming back to forever and ever again. We're going to identify a problem and we're going to find that it's me. So I'll give you the two little sayings of my teacher that I find one keeps coming back to and keeps passing on. He always says, sitting, you can't do it wrong. I always say this and nobody ever believes me. Perfectly true. And then I can point at you and say, you're not doing it wrong now. This is it. This is ordinary mind. Then why doesn't it feel like that? And then he also says, it's not a problem to have problems. And I can take that on board and I can think, so clearly my problem is that I see everything as a problem. Easy. And of course, that achieves nothing because I'm trying. I'm turning towards the way and I find I've actually turned in the opposite direction because that's not the deal. So either, on the one hand, I'm chasing the real moment, the real bit of ordinary mind, the real bit of perfect peace, calm, or I'm actually practicing not minding. Yes, I have all these problems. Yes, I'm tortured by thoughts. Yes, my life is a catastrophe, but I'm okay. Clearly is a problem to have problems. So what on earth can this actually mean? How can we begin to understand that? Once one of Suzuki's students asked him, "Great Master, what is it like to be enlightened?" And he replied, "Not sure you'd like it." Which I think is a wonderful comment, because it's not about liking or not liking. And it's when we begin to get that idea a little bit more that maybe, just maybe, we're beginning to get hold of the idea of it's not a problem to have problems. Why is it not a problem to have problems? Because what we see as our problems are actually our life, and some of that we're going to like a lot, some of it we're going to like a little, and some of it we're really not going to be happy with at all. And it's not even the picking and choosing, not even the judging, but the feeling, the state, the place that we find ourselves in when we're only too aware that these problems are problems because, and then we get into explanation and self-justification. So I could paraphrase Suzuki and say, well, look, right here, right now, what did you expect enlightenment to feel like? Does it feel like this? Okay, let's actually dive into Ordinary Mind is the Way a little bit more. It's worth thinking a little bit about actually the Chinese here, which don't tend to do that often. Ordinary mind, in this sense, is actually 3 characters. It's the character for every day. We can clearly get that a bit. We always talk about everyday Zen, Zen in my everyday life. It's the character for eternal. We can go wrong here, we can go very wrong here. And it's the character for, well, actually not mind at all. It's Shin, it's heart mind. So this isn't consciousness. This is my thinking, feeling, experiencing mind. Which to say in this sense, it's also my body. So actually it's everyday body is the way. Just this. My full experiencing being, not some mind floating above me or off into the ether. So eternal. Now that's really the tricky one, because when we think of eternity, we tend to think of something which is permanent, something which will exist forever through time. Eternal, in this sense, is that which has nothing to do with time whatsoever. It is not unchanging, it is not changing, because it is not about time. This is kind of what we were talking about when we refer to the present moment. But actually, if we see this as something divorced from time, in that way, that this is just some, kind of subtle little moment, that's not it either, because that's just literally a moment. And we can prove in the way that the past doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist, the present doesn't exist either. It's just an idea we've come up with. This is something where time does simply not figure. That is quite a hard idea to get your head around. But whenever we come across this, we want to think about something which is permanent. Yes, I want the pure, never beginning, never ending mind, which I can tap into, or my pure, never ending mind. Or I just want to be feeling good like this forever. That's not it, because that's time, that's experiencing through time. And this is not talking about that at all. It's where what we talk about as the absolute meets what we think of as the relative, life as we experience it. And this absolute is not some higher, some elsewhere. It is in actual fact identical to what we think of as the relative. But it's that not seen from the point of view of time, not seen from the point of view of separate things. And that is a hard idea, and we can work with that for years, decades even. Let's try another way into it. Let's talk about perfection for a moment. We say the perfection of this moment. Now this comes back to nothing to do, nowhere to go. I don't need to move because this moment in itself is perfect. Great. But again, there's a little bit of an issue with this idea of perfection, because perfection is like action. And it's a completed action. When something is perfected, it's completed. And we tend to think, well, okay, so things shouldn't really change from here because they're perfect. And yet, of course, the essence of life is exactly change, exactly impermanence. So this perfection, well, we could say it's a dynamic perfection, maybe, Or maybe perfection's the wrong word because it sounds too still, too static. And this is where I find this way of thinking about eternal as being potentially enormously problematic, because then I join up the two and I go, yes, this moment is perfect and it should stay just like this forever. Well, no, that's not the eternal we're talking about. And we're exactly talking about change. So it's not a kind of just sit here and be this and do nothing and never change idea. That's stone Buddha. That's, forget it, dead. We're talking about life. We're talking about change. We're talking about desire. We're talking about fear. We're talking about everything which actually is ordinary mind. This mind in this complex, psychophysical, weird being that happens to be me talking to you right now. Which brings us back to the foundation of our practice, because Joko doesn't talk about this a lot, but when she does, and Barry has explicated this a little more clearly and articulately, it's the meeting of the relative and the absolute. It's the finding this absolute, this eternal which is not everlasting in each moment. And Joko's overwhelming insight, but we most clearly experience this ourselves in our resistance to that moment. It's in a sense where we almost want to prize the relative away from the absolute, which we can't do, because I'm still experiencing the absolute if I'm banging my head against a wall. I'm still experiencing the absolute if I'm sat here in perfect bliss. And that's maybe another problem with this idea of perfection. And again, Joko's good at bringing us back to this. I am in the perfection of the moment. Yeah, lovely. I am in the perfection of the moment, whether my skull is collapsing as I smash through the windscreen of my car, or as my aorta explodes, or I reach the point where I really cannot cope with the pain from my terminal cancer. This is all perfection too, in that sense. Clearly, it is not to do with liking or not liking or being okay. But the experience of this tension, this resistance, which we keep coming back to, is the experience of life in each moment, is the experience of this being in this moment, is my ordinary mind. And that is the way, that is our practice. That is how we get to here. Shades of Eliot, arrive to where we began and recognise it for the first time. We journey in Buddhism to the other shore, only to realise that the other shore is just this. Maybe that's when we begin to know that our problems, well, it's not a problem to have them. The absolute is there as this, whether I recognise it or not. My ordinary mind, as plain as this cup I hold, what need has perfection of my assent?